Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, August the 12th. We have our state of Missouri's very first poet laureate with us, Walter Bargen. Always a pleasure to welcome you here, Walter.
Yes, it's always a pleasure for me to be here.
Today you were going to tell a story in a poem.
Yes,
right?
yes. About it's kind of the what happened in 1 year in the life of the owner of Cafe Arno, which is defunct now. It was located just north of the Heidelberg. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I think there was a laundromat in between it and the Heidelberg. And what caught my attention was the fact that what came to mind when I started reading it to myself was how important it is for us to tell stories and to write those stories down. And poetry is a great way to write stories down. Because if we don't write our stories, who's going to write our stories? Right. Nobody.
And and it's true, we all have stories to tell. My father was a wonderful storyteller, and he didn't write any of his stories down, but I remember he would tell stories about how he came over to this country as a little baby, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, going through Ellis Island. And I remember I would sit there, I would be fascinated by the stories that he would tell, and then growing up as an immigrant in the United States. But he didn't write any of them down. So the only memory I have is what's in my head.
Well, maybe it's time you start writing those stories down.
Perhaps.
Perhaps,
yeah.
yes. Well, anyway, this is 1 year in the life of Tom, the owner of Cafe Arno, and all of the things that happened to him in that year. This poem is called Domino Cafe Shop, and of course, domino, you think of the dominoes falling, in a line, and that's exactly kind of what was happening to him. It was just one tragic event after another. This begins with a quote from T.S. Eliot. He was a fan of T.S. Eliot. The vacant into the vacant, the captains, the merchant bankers. That's from East Cooker, which is part of the Four Quartets. His wife, the astrologer, the diviner of all confused tendencies, stargazer and planet reader, knows that Saturn returns every 10 years to club us over the head, kick us in the groin, encourage us to divorce spouses, run off to other cities with the kids, which she does. Second, and in the same year, his brother dies. He flies to Seattle, closing his coffee shop for a week, trusting that his help would drink up the profits, offer unlimited free refills, flood the sidewalk with a foaming elixir. He returns to a sympathetic and disgruntled clientele. He reads a selection from Four Quartets at the funeral. Third, and the year isn't over yet, his father dies, and he flies back to Seattle. He closes his shop again. His customers are beginning to doubt his veracity. How could so much happen to one person in a single year? Caffeine withdrawal cuts into his business. Dressed in his only suit, he continues to read Eliot. The year has no end, or so he begins to believe when he loses his business, having forgotten to sign the lease, yet continuing to pay his bills, but the competition up the street wants to open a second business and closes the deal ahead of him. Out on the street, filling the back of his decade-old car with chairs and tables, he's litigating antitrust, not to mention suing for his espresso maker's water pump, burned up by the landlord shutting off the water to hurry him out. If in his beginning is his end, he wants to know why this year doesn't know that. His apartment burns down. The furnace caught fire, and the landlord, money launderer and suspected drug dealer, shows up with 2 policemen. The one dressed in black combat fatigues tells him that it's a well-kept secret, that the Constitution doesn't guarantee any right to privacy. His hand on his revolver during the entire discourse. He wonders if these are the hollow men. Sixth, if not a new year, then a new city. Time, space, an uninterrupted continuum, and he's the domino of disaster falling that far and farther. He's told a realtor he'll rent the apartment on the West End in St. Louis, but he doesn't have the money. And the car he's driving, overloaded with tables and chairs, riding on the axles, leaves the street brimming with the aroma of burning clutch as he pulls away. All in 1 year.
That is one tragic story. It's almost too much to comprehend, but it's all true.
It's well, there may be some slight embellishments. I mean, the very idea of condensing 1 year's tragedies into 2 pages, requires some manipulation.
Yeah.
But, no.
What inspired you to write that poem?
As a writer, I'm always listening to other people tell their stories. And, every once in a while, a story will grab a hold of me, and I'll write this down. And sometimes it, turns into a good poem, and sometimes it's just some notes that I took.
So now, what book is that in?
This was published in 2013, I believe. It's Trouble Behind Glass Doors.
Okay, that's the name of the...
That's the title of the book.
Trouble Behind Glass Doors.
Yes.
And all of these books are available where, Walter?
There are 3 bookstores in town that carry a number of my titles. I'm not always certain that they have the right titles.
But the 3 bookstores are?
Skylark Bookshop, Yellow Dog Books, and Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
And
do you write a poem almost every day?
I'm not quite sure what drove me to do this, but when I was quite young, that meaning I didn't really start writing until I was a junior in high school. And my first poem was on an ink blotter, on a desk. And it was a poem, but maybe not a very good poem. And I always carried a notebook around with me. I've
So
got
you
one
could
in my
write
back
whenever you
pocket
want to.
and I started with I needed to write a poem every day.
Okay.
And I did that for about 30 years. So I have stacks of notebooks that I'm starting to go through, and I'm going, why didn't I do something
Well,
like
here's
that?
a new book I can make, right? We're out of time, Walter. Thank you so much for coming by. If there's something you'd like to hear or see, please let me know. Drop me an email, pepperp@missouri.edu.